with that, I will pass it to our awesome guests to kind of introduce themselves and their Northwestern affiliations, as well as what their titles are now. So I will pass it to Mason.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mason Davis. I am the Interim Executive Director of Transgender Europe, or TGU, in Berlin, Germany these days. Graduated in 1993 and really delighted to be here.
Thanks, Mason.
Hi, I'm Mia DeMeza. I use she, her pronouns. I was a comparative literary studies and Italian major at Northwestern. I graduated in 1996. My dad was sure I would be completely unemployable. I have been employed. I graduated from Northwestern, for the record. And currently, I serve as the executive director of Earth Echo International. We're a nonprofit organization founded by Philippe Cousteau, and we focus on environmental education, advocacy, and leadership. Pleasure to be here today.
Hi, everyone. My name is David Ernesto Munar. I use he, him pronouns. I started as an undergrad at Medill, and in my freshman year, I changed to arts and sciences and changed my major to Hispanic studies, which is a literature degree with poli-sci and history. And I loved it. It was great. I was also, like Mia, concerned about whether I would find employment, but it was great. It really developed my language skills. In Spanish, I'm Colombian American. My parents are first generation. My parents are from Colombia. My sister's from Colombia, South America. So it served me well. I'm currently the president and CEO at Howard Brown Health, which is a federally qualified health center with 11 clinics across Chicago, from Rogers Park to the Inglewood neighborhood, serving 30,000 patients and clients. And 2/3 of our patients are from the LGBTQ community.
It's funny, I forgot to say what I studied, but David, I did the same thing. So I started off in Medill in journalism, and then at the end of my freshman year, transferred over to arts and sciences. I studied American history. Thankfully, at least at the time, we were able to be very flexible in what courses we took. So in essence, I kind of created a major in the history of social movements in the United States, and had a certificate in women's studies as well. It served me well.
Yeah. Thank you all for sharing just some background about your Northwestern studies and your positions as well. So let's kick it off. Can you tell us some more about what you do today and these roles that you all occupy, along with some of the impactful classes or experiences in undergrad that led you to consider and also pursue your career in advocacy? And let's kick it off with David.
Thanks, Imani. Yeah, my time on campus was really fantastic. I made a decision when I arrived as a freshman that I wanted to be out on campus, and got involved in the Gay and Lesbian Student Alliance pretty early, a group I ended up being the president of for a few years. And through that, so I was involved in that group, and we did a lot of educational programming, did a lot of support, student support, and we did some advocacy. And actually, that was really the first taste of advocacy that I got when I joined. When I became a student at Northwestern, the university had recently added sexual orientation to its non-discrimination clause, and so we wanted to test the kind of the strength of that non-discrimination clause, and we're petitioning the Board of Trustees to ban U.S. military recruits from campus, because at the time they would not enlist openly LGBT people. We did not prevail in our quest to convince the Board of Trustees, but we certainly brought a lot of visibility to the topic. We really showed the limits of that protection, as well as the influence of the military on university life, and did succeed in getting more funding for the Gay and Lesbian Student Alliance. I also have to say I worked also very closely with friends who were very active in the anti-apartheid movement, and trying to encourage the university to divest from companies that were profiting from segregated South Africa. So those were really sentinel or formative experiences, and really showed me kind of how important advocacy can be and how applicable it can be for kind of my communities and people I care about.
Thank you. Mia?
So while I was at Northwestern, I spent a lot of time doing theater. And that certainly shaped the early part of my career, which was spent in arts management. I quickly saw I wasn't going to be a performer because there were so many amazing performers around us, but I loved being a part of the arts. So I went into arts management. That made sense. The classes that I took at, and let me add that at that time, I had no focus on environmental work and wasn't involved in that sort of work until much later in my life and in my career. But there were a couple of classes that I took that certainly stick with me for very different reasons. One was Arabic literature and translation, of all things, because it gave me a little bit more of a worldview than I had at that time. I was from a very small town in Western Pennsylvania. I had spent quite a bit of time in Italy with family, but that was it. I didn't have a good sense of what went on in the broader world, believe it or not. And that class helped me to open my eyes a bit and to understand the importance of a global worldview, to understand the importance of both sides to every story. Because, certainly I knew really one perspective of what went on in the Middle East and very little about the other. So that was incredibly helpful. And has continued to serve me well as I travel internationally, both for life and for work, and certainly helped to shape some of my early experiences in travel. The other class that I found particularly interesting was sociology of the sex roles. That certainly has always stayed with me. While that is not the advocacy that I spend a lot of time working on in my life, it helped me to see the importance of advocating for gender equity, for reproductive rights, and those are things that I continue to care about in my life. I'm going to just talk a very little bit about what I do in my daily life too. We are a very small organization. I was the first full-time employee, so I've had an opportunity to build everything from scratch, right? We've built everything from the employee manual to the benefits package, anything that you can imagine, we've created from scratch, and how we work with young people around the world. We've created all of those policies and procedures as well, which is tremendous. And I've had the chance to travel and to meet people from all over the world, but I spend a lot of my time sitting at my desk trying to figure out how to pay everybody and how to raise money so that we can continue to keep all of our doors open. And I'm sure that David and Mason have similar experiences. So fundraising is an excellent skill to have if you are considering a career in this field.
Yes, considering all of your roles, I'm sure that is a large part of your day-to-day. And Mason?
I'm having a moment here because I'm realizing that David and I were both in gala together at the Gay and Lesbian Association. At the time it was Gay and Lesbian. We weren't so great on bi and trans issues yet at the time. But yeah, David, we totally knew each other in undergrad. I did not look at all like this. So I kind of want to get a picture of you when you're younger, but I'm like, poof, it's a small world, people. So I came out, as I mentioned, I started at Medill, and then my freshman year was really an eye-opener for me. It was super hard, I have to admit. Near the end of my freshman year and right before sophomore year, I realized that I was queer, came out. That was very difficult. I lost support from my family at the time financially, and was really struggling. I also had a very hard freshman year, which I can talk about later. But what happened is I took the one gay and lesbian history course that Northwestern offered at the time. And it changed my life. It put into context what I was experiencing as a young queer person at the time, helped put my life into context as not just a one-time or individual experience I was having as I was struggling with harassment on campus, being very out, my own family issues, but it put it in context of a broader social movement and political movement that helped me better understand my world. And in addition to that, then I started taking more history courses. And I remember taking a couple of courses on African history, Latin American history, labor history. It really opened my eyes up to a broader struggle and social justice movement that then was complemented by a series of women's studies courses as well that helped me understand gender and how these issues are interconnected. And I did a lot of work study at the Women's Center where I interned through many of my years at Northwestern. And then meanwhile was very active, sometimes to the detriment of my attendance at classes, but very active in not just the LGBT movement. There was a lot of anti-violence discussion going on at the time, in marches that we were holding on campus and in Chicago, doing work against the war. And we had a very active war in Iraq at the time, also doing work around reproductive rights and clinic defense. So I was doing a lot of activism at the time of ACT UP and Queer Nation that was very active in Chicago as well, that politicized me. And it somehow then by the end of undergrad, I'm like, I want to run an LGBT group when I get older. And sure enough, I would have been fortunate to do that. This is the fourth LGBT group I have been the executive director of in my career. And, I will echo what Mia said about fundraising. I mean, at this point, a lot of my work is around fundraising, convincing people how to think about issues, motivating staff, and trying to make sure that we are part of a movement that is effective, changing the world, but also funded and sustainable. So a lot of the, I remember when I graduated, I told my dad when he asked, what did you learn? I'm like, I learned how to read, write, and think. And that is what I learned at Northwestern, and it has served me incredibly well.
Awesome. Thank you all. Thank you all for sharing. Yeah, it's just like, first of all, very cool, Mason and David, just realizing that connection there. Like, yeah, this, just hearing about these, what you all were doing in undergrad and how that led to where you are today is really incredible. So what was, after undergrad, what was that first job, and how did that impact your career path? I find that these kinds of careers that we talk about with social justice and DEI advocacy, the path may not be super clear, especially to students who might be considering that now. So hearing about those first jobs and the opportunities that were there for you that you kind of made into your own and led you to where you are now is really, really helpful and insightful. So with that, Mason, do you wanna kick us off?
Yeah, so my first job out of Northwestern was working at what was at the time called Horizons Community Services, which is now the Center on Halsted, the LGBT community center in Chicago. And I worked at the Anti-Violence Project there as a civil court advocate. So my job was to help staff a 24-hour crisis line, an anti-violence line. And let me say, this is before cell phones. We had 2 pagers, beepers, that people would call into this number, and we had volunteers and I on staff that would get this number, and we would call the number back and say, okay, what's going on? And then we would try to provide them resources. I got a lot of calls at all times of the day around that. We would train volunteers. And then I would advocate for people who are experiencing police harassment, misconduct. So did some of the first LGBT trainings of the Chicago Police Department at the time, and would support people who are experiencing employment discrimination, housing discrimination, and whatnot, which was quite, and violence in general, which was quite high in Chicago at the time. I feel very fortunate I was able to get that first job. It was spectacular, it was hard, and I learned so much about working in a nonprofit and how to work with people in that role. So that was the beginning for me. I will say after that, I did a series of non-activist jobs because I had to I moved to San Francisco. I had to pay the bills. And so career paths are not always linear. It took me a little bit of time then to circle back and get that kind of job again. I ended up getting a graduate degree in social work with a concentration in nonprofit management. And so if you find that you don't get that first perfect dream job, don't give up. Many of us have different paths that we take that oftentimes will continue to steer us back to wherever we're meant to be.
Awesome. Mia?
So my first job out of school was in 1996. I worked in the education department of the Wolf Trap Foundation for the Performing Arts outside of Washington, D.C. It's America's only national park for the performing arts. It's very much like Ravinia for anybody who's in Ravinia outside of Chicago. I made $18,000 a year. I remember that specifically. And it set me on the path of arts management. As said before, that's what I thought I would be spending the majority of my career doing. And after a short deviation, that really was where I thought I would be and where the first part of my career was. So it was a fantastic first job and helped me to get to a new city that I really cared about and loved. That was, I think, that can be as formative as that first job, and in the industry that I wanted to be in at that time. David?
I'm loving this, by the way. My first job after graduation was a 6-month assignment at the American Refugee Committee, an organization in Rogers Park on Howard that had a project to reach out to immigrants who had applied for amnesty, and it was an Reagan era amnesty program, and it was in 2 steps. So they had to apply once and then fulfill background check, language courses, citizenship courses, and then to complete the process, they had to apply again. So my job was to go to churches all over Rogers Park and grocery stores and community groups and set up tables on the corner and make sure that people did not miss that last step or they would revert back to undocumented status. And so that was, what I just told you about the job is about all the training I got and a clipboard and was sent out to go do it. And then I did, I stayed with the organization for another like 2 years part-time as teaching English as a second language, which I really enjoyed. But after that 6 months ended, thanks to a Northwestern connection, I landed entry-level job at the AIDS Foundation of Chicago as administrative assistant. And I was also, remember, the annual salary is $19,000 a year. And I was very excited. And the organization had 12 people and was, organizing the fight against AIDS in Chicago with a dozen organizations that were all the organizations, including AIDS Foundation Chicago, were brand new. And I spent the next 23 years there and ended up having 8 different jobs, the majority of which were in the policy department, where I was a policy associate, policy director, director of policy and communications, and then senior VP, and then CEO the last 3 years. So that was a huge, so I've really only worked at 3 places in my whole life. And in 2014, came over here to Howard Brown Health. So advocacy has been a big part, has been kind of the big arch of my career.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And those salaries, oof. Y'all made it work though.
When I made 19,000, I remember asking my mom, how does somebody spend this much money? Like, I thought I was rich. It's very different.
For sure. Well, thank you for sharing. I'm gonna take a little pivot here too, with the questions that we have, because some of you already spoke about this, but those pivots that you made, and if you can maybe tell us more about a time when you made a pivot in your career. or when you like started exploring other career options after you graduated? What did that look like? I know Mason went to grad school. Mia, you had this kind of transition with thinking about the arts and transition to something else. So tell us more about those moments of pivoting. David, do you wanna start?
Sure. I had no intention of staying in Chicago for a long time, or even staying at AIDS Foundation in Chicago for a long time. But the work was really exciting and really interesting. I learned a ton with every position and every opportunity I was given. I think I immediately, I came out of being a student at Northwestern, feeling really empowered and proud of my, graduate accomplishment, and thought I had a lot to offer. And joining the workforce of nonprofit actually really was a cold awakening that I had a lot to learn. And but I had great mentors at AIDS Foundation Chicago, and they kept offering me new opportunities. And so I stayed. I think, for me, I also in '94 became HIV positive, and so I was so that was a big issue, and a big, both kept me close to the charity and the mission of AIDS advocacy, but also I was petrified of doing something like working for a smaller organization or going back to school, and the prospect of maybe not having good health insurance that I desperately needed. I think for me, the big pivot was, actually leaving AIDS Foundation Chicago. It's certainly home. It's still home. I still adore the organization. But I reached a point where I, wanted to know if I could work anywhere else. And then once I was offered the opportunity to lead Howard Brown Health, it really made a lot of sense, because so much of my career at the end of AIDS Foundation, of my time at AIDS Foundation, was working on comprehensive health reform legislation at the state and federal level. And the Affordable Care Act was fully implemented in 2014. So joining Howard Brown at the time meant I could see the fruits of that work in real time and see how it was going to affect, clinical delivery and patients, and see it on the ground. So, once I kind of saw that arch, it really made a lot of sense, and I'm so glad I did it. It's been really a fulfilling career here in community health, and I've learned a ton about healthcare delivery and operations, and it's really expanded my understanding of kind of health policy. So it was a good move, but it was hard to leave home. I grew roots at AIDS Foundation, but I'm glad I did it. Mia?
I did two big career pivots. One, although, I spent a lot of time in arts management, I had always had this thing about Italy. I wanted to move to Italy. I wanted to go to Italy. I wanted to work there for a while. So I literally stalked this doctor who was opening a transplant center in Palermo, Sicily. He worked at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, not far from where I had grown up. And I called him, I emailed him. Finally, he interviewed me and I got a job. And I was there for a year and I hated it. I was so unhappy and miserable. And I think it was a huge learning experience, because this was something I thought that I wanted and had worked for and had actively pursued. And then it was just not what it was. And it was the first time I realized it's okay that this did not pan out the way I thought it was going to, and it's okay to make a change. So I was luckily offered a job back at Wolf Trap, where I went back to happily and stayed for many years. And then later, I was at another arts management job in the DC area. Great organization, Americans for the Arts, but I had gotten stuck between two bosses and decided I needed to leave, and quickly. It was just not the right fit at that moment. And that's when the Earth Echo opportunity literally landed in my lap. And as I alluded to before, I knew nothing about this field. I knew nothing about the environment. I knew nothing about any of the programmatic work or any of the legislative work or advocacy work that went on in this field. And remember, this was 15 years ago. So, climate action and environmental action was not as much a part of the zeitgeist as it is now, and was not talked about quite as regularly. You had people just, this wave really starting to get in, to understand more and to take a little bit more action. And so that was a huge change. I was intrigued by the possibility of growing something from the ground up, and that's why I decided to take the risk. And I'm so glad I did, because I have now been here for 15 years and we have been able to see tremendous strides in our work, and have worked with young people literally all over the world on these issues.
So, so I worked for a couple of years, as I mentioned, at Horizons. I loved that. It was great. It was intense work, but I had always wanted to leave the Midwest, I have to admit. And so at some point, I loaded everything up into a Toyota Tercel, including a couple of cats, and moved out to San Francisco without a job. I don't recommend that, but I learned a lot about myself. I worked as a mail person. I worked as an administrative assistant. I had 6 months working for a for-profit company, and I hated it. And it affirmed that I am just not about making money for somebody else. And so otherwise, I have spent my entire career in the nonprofit sector. But it took me a while to circle back to do this kind of work. I actually, for a bit, was building databases for the Longshoremen's Union, and was thinking I would go into computers because it was, that was the thing, and had just decided to go to graduate school when I realized that when I realized my carpal tunnel, my hands were so bad that my computer engineering future was not for me. So around the same time, I realized I was transgender, and I didn't really know many trans people at the time. It was kind of a full-time job to kind of navigate that transition. And so in retrospect, I'm kind of glad I had these jobs that let me actually leave work at 5 and not have to think about them afterwards, because it allowed me more space to figure out my own life. And I ended up starting a nonprofit doing organizing among transgender men in Los Angeles, called FQM Alliance, that's now Gender Justice LA. Went to graduate school, as I mentioned, and then after grad school worked for United Way of Greater Los Angeles. And United Way was a great way to learn from a big picture perspective about the nonprofit sector. I did grant making, I did fundraising. I had about 4 different roles there over the course of about 7 years. And at the meantime, at night and weekends, I would run this organization I had helped start as a volunteer. So I was just working around the clock, whether paid or unpaid. And then at some point I was contacted by the Transgender Law Center up in the Bay Area of California, and asked to apply for to be their executive director when their founder was leaving. And so I ended up then running a trans legal group, even though I was not an attorney. So I spent about 8 years in San Francisco running the Transgender Law Center, which ended up doing a lot more national as well as advocacy and litigation. And I loved it. So I learned tons about policy work. I went from having been a direct action activist to being much more in the system, learning how to, taking meetings with Nancy Pelosi, and advocating for legal changes both in California and Washington, D.C. It was amazing. I learned so much from that. And when I started, we had 3 people. By the time I left, we had 14, and now they're much larger than that. So I left, though, TLC because I believe that nonprofits should be about the mission and the membership more than the leader. So I tend to have a philosophy for myself. I don't stay for too long. I don't want an organization to be dependent on me. So I left there and I didn't know what I would do. I consulted for a while, did some traveling internationally, worked for a number of foundations for different projects that I cared about, helped start an international trans fund as a consultant, and then was asked to come on as an interim for a global group. I did that. until Trump was elected. And then I felt like it was time to come in and back to the US. So I pivoted and worked for a foundation that does LGBT giving for a year or two, then went to a DC group to be their CEO, to do policy work at the state level and DC. And I, to be honest, I hated it for some reasons. And sometimes that happens. So I got my number two to take on that on. I left again, said, what am I going to do next? And started consulting, and then was asked to come be the interim director at here in Berlin. So I don't know what's next, to be honest. I have a contract for another year. I kind of like it that way. I really like being an interim leader to try to help organizations in crisis move to stabilize and get them to move to a higher level of impact. So I like to come in, make a lot of change, and then go, so things are easier for the next leader. And I have found by even taking some risks and sometimes quitting, not knowing what is next, generally the next opportunity shows up pretty soon. So I have learned to kind of trust that pattern. And I love it, but I don't recommend moving internationally during a pandemic if you can help it. Like Mia was talking about with Italy, I've always dreamed of being in Europe. It's great I'm in Berlin, not so great to be in Berlin when things are locked down. So, sometimes you just have to roll with the punches.
Yes, for sure. Rolling with the punches. So fascinating. Thank you all for sharing those pivots. Really incredible. Awesome. We're going to have audience Q&A pretty soon. So if you have questions, audience members, feel free to put those in the chat. You can either message them to Cassie Koski over here, or put them in the chat for everyone, but we'll get to that soon. I'd like to combine two of the questions that we have here. So what advice do you have for students who may be exploring these kinds of career paths now, of like, oh, that sounds really fascinating, how do I get there now as an undergraduate? Well, what would you tell yourselves if you were in undergrad right now, if in these student shoes? And yeah, what is that advice that you have for people maybe pursuing these kinds of career paths? David.
That's a great question. So, I think I made a good selection in terms of my major. I did some kind of concentration, some courses in art because I was really enjoying it, and those were tough. I wish I had done a little more applied sciences. I ended up in the health field, which it's been a great field, but doing some more applied sciences probably would have been good. And I think my fellow panelists here are talking a lot about the fundraising and the operational and kind of the maintaining of a nonprofit. And nonprofit is only a tax status, but they're small businesses. And and we still have to pay our employees and pay our insurance and pay our rent, and many other costs. And so some business, I've learned a great deal about business, but had no formal training, and that so business courses would have been a good choice if I had elected them.
So the advice, I'll start with the advice for what it's worth. I think Mason alluded to this earlier. Maybe the thing that you are learning that will be the most beneficial to you in your career is the critical thinking skills and the problem solving skills. And that's not something you realize always until later, or certainly that I did not, but that is by far the best thing I took out of my liberal arts undergraduate degree. Learning to build partnerships is the next piece. And I know networking can feel a little daunting, but it starts just with one-on-one. So if you can make that connection with one person and really build a relationship professionally with that one person, that's the start of it. And that's how partnerships are born then across organizations, and how coalitions are then formed. So if you can start even with that one connection, I think that's incredibly powerful. A couple things I wish I would have told myself earlier on. there are so many options. You don't need to know quite yet. I still don't know what I'm doing with my life on most days, but it's okay that you don't. And sometimes the not knowing is what leads to the amazing experiences. So definitely be open to that and let them take you where they may. But maybe, as David mentioned, you might want to focus a little bit on a few really tangible skill sets sooner than I did. I just went back. I started this summer to get my MBA, actually. So because I am 47 and there are some of those skills that I do not have in my toolbox and I really could use them. So you might want to do that before 47 because my memory is really not what it was when I was 20 and at Northwestern. So those are my couple of bits of information. Mason?
Yeah, I mean, the one degree I think about going back to get is an MBA for the same reasons. So, you know, as an executive director, you know, you've got to manage people, you've got to manage money, you've got to manage complex partnerships, contracts. There are a lot of things that make me wish perhaps I had not taken Earth as a planet for my math credit. So the ability to think and read and write, strategic thinking, problem solving, all are super helpful. So, you know, build on that, learn how to read quickly, how to analyze things. I will echo, you know, the importance of being able to work well with others, you know, conflict resolution, listening, active listening, the ability to meet people where they're at and figure out how do you communicate with them effectively, public speaking. Those are all really useful skills, and anything you can do to strengthen your writing and your public speaking and communication skills, it's going to be useful in whatever you do. And yeah, I do wish I had a little bit more of the management or economics training in my background. You can make up for that if you need to, but yeah, it says something that all three of us are echoing a bit of that.
Definitely. And one more question that I have, and anyone can feel free to bounce in on this. It's a little bit of a curveball. But as you have, and here it is in the audience questions. Lindsay asked the same thing that I was thinking. What's been in this career with all these amazing advocacy projects that you all have been like working on or consulted on, what has been something that you've been like so proud of throughout in your career? We'd love to know, and any other things that you want to share with students today.
I can start on that. I think the thing I'm most proud of is what I'm doing right now, and not what I'm doing right now, but what all of the young people that we work with at Earth Echo International are doing right now. And that's what I find so amazingly satisfying, is that we have given a space for young people to use their voices to advocate for the things that they care about, and for their environment and for their communities, and have had fantastic opportunities that we have helped them to pursue. We have a group of young people from around the world who serve as the primary young leaders in our organization. We call them our Youth Leadership Council. So we had members from the Youth Leadership Council who were invited to speak to the Biden administration as they were starting to comment on the America the Beautiful plan and to think about what that was going to look like. Just earlier this year, that was phenomenal. And this week we had two of our young leaders were invited to the Ocean Justice Forum here in DC. The staff were not invited, for the record. We were not invited to participate in those conversations, but two of our young leaders were. And being able to help our young leaders find their larger voice and give them more of a platform is what I find so fantastic and satisfying. So that's been the best moment for me is right now.
Amazing.
I can share a few. So, I mean, I've had really just been really blessed to have lots of opportunities to make an impact. And, you know, one was working with other activists nationally that they identified that the United States government program called a PEPFAR, a President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which is a multi-billion-dollar program to help the developing world obtain antiretroviral medications for people living with AIDS in the third world, was requiring donor countries to develop national AIDS plans. And so that was a requirement to receive that funding. And the United States did not have a plan. And so we started a campaign to kind of highlight this issue and to press on then candidates John McCain and then Senator Barack Obama to make a pledge that they would develop a national AIDS plan. And we were able to secure pledges to do so from both candidates. And then after the election, worked with the Obama administration, and we're able to bring that to life. And the Biden administration just yesterday updated the plan. So that was really an exciting project that really started from the community level. And then the other is at AIDS Foundation Chicago, we worked for about, oh my God, like 15 years on sterile syringe access that, volumes of public health data showed was effective at reducing rates of HIV infection among injection drug users without increasing rates of drug use. Now I had it would not lower drug use, but it would not raise it. And so we were working on legislation for about 6 years to persuade the Illinois General Assembly to allow non-prescription sale of sterile syringes at pharmacies by adults. And we prevailed finally after 6 years of work, and then worked really closely with the health department on implementation and monitoring and safe disposal of used syringes. And injection-related infections in Illinois dropped by 70%. And so so I'm really proud of that, because it was not just a legislative and policy victory that was hard fought, but it actually translated into, real benefits for vulnerable communities.
Thank you for sharing.
I'm going to get real just for a second, which is, there are a couple things I'm proudest of. And one is, to be honest, that I'm here. I did not have an easy time at Northwestern. And I say that for any of you who may be like, I'm barely holding on. I had a super challenging childhood. I got to Northwestern. I experienced a sexual assault my first year on campus. I came out, experienced a lot of rejection. Things were tough. And there were times when I thought about dropping out, and I didn't. I stuck with it. I got the degree in 4 years, and I ended up being able to do some freaking amazing things in my life that I never would have dreamed of, even when I was at the university. So if you're one of those people who are like, this is tough, yeah, but don't give up, okay? The fact that we have our pronouns on our introduction is one of the things I'm proud of. Having been part of the trans part of the LGBTI movement for almost 25 years now, I have just seen tremendous change. When I was at Transgender Law Center, we had the first case that where the federal administration interpreted sex discrimination to include transgender people. In California, we passed the first bill to actually provide transition-related health care for trans people through their insurance. I was able to work with a coalition of people internationally to create the first ever International Trans Fund to support small trans groups all around the world. Now I get to represent a network of 166 trans groups throughout Europe and Central Asia, and help stabilize and grow an organization that is about to do some really exciting work around legal gender recognition, healthcare, and fighting this kind of anti-trans, anti-gender movement that's happening around the world, including in the United States. I get to be a part of all that, and that's pretty amazing. It's not a bad way to make a living. So I got a lot, like all of us, to be that I get to remember sometimes when I'm having a hard day.
Absolutely. Thank you all. And with that, I will pass it to Cassie for any for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Amani, and thank you all for being here. You are so inspiring, and I was getting goosebumps hearing about all of the amazing things you all have to be proud of. So thank you for sharing. And we do have some questions from students, and I'm going to start with our question from Bex, who is asking a question to Mia directly. They were a theater major who discovered that arts administration wasn't for them either. And they're wondering, how has your arts background been an asset to you in advocacy?
That's a good question. I think it has to do with the partnership piece that I talked about before. You know, when you're part of a production of any sort, you are working in conjunction with all of these other people, and being able to build something together is so important. And that is what we do in our organization, and certainly something that I've taken on. The public speaking also certainly helps. You know, having had some of that, as I think Mason mentioned that earlier, a lot of what I do is talking to internal constituents, external constituents about our work, constantly raising money, as I said, needing to talk to funders, but just speaking at conferences in different places. So that certainly has played in. If you're comfortable speaking in front of a crowd, it helps. I hope that answers what you were looking for.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Mia. And of course, as we're asking questions from students, students and young alumni, sorry, please let us know if you have any follow-up questions or anything to add in the chat, and we're happy to follow up. Our next question is from Carlin, who is asking, what advice do you all have for someone who's been in the workforce for a few years and is looking to make one of those career changes into advocacy? What's the best first step in your mind? And this, I asked a follow-up question. Carlin is currently in media, so that's the industry they're in right now, and would love to throw this question to one.
I can take a crack at this one. You know, I moved from Medill to Arts and Sciences. I'm glad I did that, but my interest in journalism is actually in my basic training in journalism has served me well my whole career, and media has changed so tremendously, and there's been such a divestment of, you know, of professionals in media organizations that for those of us that work in nonprofits, we have to generate our own kind of media packages. So writing a good press release, you know, disseminating our own photos and captions, you know, kind of telling our stories and really spoon feeding that to media outlets has been really an important way of expanding our message and our mission. And so I think there is a real market for people with media training in the nonprofit sector. You know, we have to create collateral, all sorts of collateral communications and messaging to different audiences, you know, working on online platforms. So those skills are really essential. I think, you know, looking at those opportunities in nonprofits is one. And then for anyone that's interested in advocacy, certainly just getting involved. I mean, all of our causes have coalitions, have constituency opportunities. You know, just join a advocate. You know, any one of our organizations have email lists that are asking for not only financial assistance, but assistance in contacting elected officials and raising awareness about our causes and getting activated. And those are actually really important ways to start to understand what the context is. You know, do some homework. You know, I think finding a few organizations that you're really passionate about and learning what they do and following them and contributing. And they'll all have, you know, auxiliary groups that you could join as a volunteer. And those are also ways to leverage and show your talents and get involved in a more direct or staff capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if our Mason, I see, or I was trying to see if anyone unmuted themselves, but if anyone has anything else to add about advice to get into advocacy.
I would suggest, you know, volunteering if groups that you care about have volunteer opportunities. And many of us are willing to take a meeting, ask for an informational interview. Do your research, do your homework so you know the organization, know who you're meeting with, but let them know like, hey, this is really, you have a mission I'm really passionate about. I'd love to do this work. Can I meet you? Can you give me any advice? And then you never know. If there's a job opening, sometimes that name stands out on a resume. Or if there's something that is a good hook, you're more likely to get in the door. So many of the basic skills are needed: communications, finance, human resource, advocacy, writing, you name it, we need it in advocacy organizations. So it's a matter of, in my case, oftentimes I'm looking for somebody who has had some access to a nonprofit or an NGO, so they understand that it is a little different than working for a corporation with 500 people if you're wanting to work for an organization with 15. So get exposure, but there's a lot of entry points.
Yeah, absolutely, Mason. That's great. And oh, great. I see, David, you're sharing some good resources here. But I'd love to, and Mia, I don't want to cut you off. Do you have anything to add to that last? Okay, perfect. Katie, I see you have a question and would love to invite you to turn your mic and camera on.
Hi there. Thank you for this talk. I really appreciate it. I've been in mental health care and management and supervision for about 30 years, and I'd love to get involved in advocacy because, as we've seen over the last year and a half, mental health is super important, but I don't know what those organizations are. So I'm wondering, how does one find those, and how does one find those email lists to start the process?
Are you Illinois based?
I'm in California.
Oh, you're in California.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's almost every state has kind of a, I mean, I know that there's National Association of Mental Health, NAMI, that has chapters all over the country. So there's probably a California chapter, and they probably have a coalition of, California's huge, so probably have 100 or more organizations that are affiliates of NAMI in California. So that would probably be a place to start. National Association of Mental Health. I forgot what the I is for, but it's NAMI. Yeah.
Thanks.
California Coalition for Mental Health as well.
This is great. Thank you. And thanks, Katie, for asking this question. Some great resources shared here. And I know we are approaching the end of our hour together, but I do have one more question for you all. Northwestern is not a cheap school, and there are often family pressures around, quote unquote, making the degree worth it. And I'm wondering if you all have advice for navigating some of those challenging career conversations with family members, mentors, people in your life, who might have those questions, and would love to toss it to any of you who would like to answer.
I mean, I can just say briefly, I mean, that was one of the main reasons I moved from Medill to arts and sciences. I mean, I was not, I did a lot of kind of journalism, high school journalism, and the first year of Medill underwhelmed me. And my family was sacrificing quite a bit to send me to Chicago for this opportunity. So I wanted to make the most of it. I think, I have in my career, wondered if I needed a master's degree, and have toyed with the idea. But I've also found in the nonprofit sector how valuable actual experience is, and I've gratefully not, it's not impeded my career growth. So and I've been able to learn quite a bit on the job. I'm sure there's frameworks and academic topics that I could learn better. So I want to be really clear that I don't know that, I wish I had more formal training in some areas, but the master's degree did not hold me back, so I don't have one, I just have a BA, and that's been fine for me.
I'll add that I think there's always a place for people who can think critically and who can problem solve. I've used those words already before. And you know, looking at some of the organizations that you might not have known about, the associations, there's an association for everything. And they're all located here in Alexandria, Virginia, not far from where I live. You know, that's a way to apply skills that you're learning in school to the areas of interest that you have, or, you know, to the vending machine folks, because there is literally an association for everything. But that's just an example of a type of organization that does do advocacy work specific to an industry. So if you're feeling the need to marry that a little more closely to a targeted area of focus, an association is an interesting way to go, I think.
Yeah, I actually know in my own professional network, people I've met in my career, a number of Northwestern grads who are running really amazing advocacy organizations all over the country. So one, there is a really nice network. We don't always network well together. We could do better with the Alumni Association probably around that. But it's powerful. And every time I meet an NU grad doing this work, they're the people who are super smart doing good work that I want to hang out with. So that's nice. So there is a network, and it does show. And the other thing I'll note is, so I went to graduate school at UCLA. As I mentioned, I got my degree in social work, and I was shocked by the education at UCLA and how poor it was compared to my NU education. And I'll just be honest about that. UCLA is a great school. It's not to put it down, but what it made me really appreciate the quality of education at NU that is very much worth it. So I know it's expensive. I did not come from a family with money. I'm very grateful for some grants. I finally finished paying my student loans, but it is for undergrad. But it's worth it. And so I think, you know, as you're talking to family, like there really is a difference, because you're not just a number. You're not just, you know, everybody using the same textbook. You actually have an ability to get real individualized support and connection to professors to really think critically and to make a real difference in the world.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mason. Such great insights to end on with our time together here today. You all shared so much great advice and so many inspiring stories, and we really appreciate you all taking some time today to help our students and young alumni continue to build their network and learn, you know, these different insights from you all and learn about these career paths. So I will definitely encourage folks who are on the call again to connect with our alumni speakers on LinkedIn, you know, reach out to them and thank them for their time today and build that network. And I will say to folks on the call, we're going to share out a $20 Grubhub gift card credit because normally we buy students and alumni lunch when we have these events, and we can't do that in the virtual format. So we're sending Grubhub credits. So keep an eye out for that, but I definitely just want to thank our alumni so much for your time today. This was a really great conversation, and we appreciate you being here. Thanks for everyone for logging in. We hope you have a great rest of your day, and go Cats.
Thank you. Appreciate it.